Hello and welcome to this short reflection for Ascension Day. In comparison to Christmas, Holy Week and Easter, Ascension Day often just passes us by. Even if we're able to meet in our churches, because it's a Thursday, the congregation may be very small and rather like some of the other events in the church year, like Ash Wednesday and some Saints' Days, we may not fully understand what it is we're actually marking. And we are, of course, keen to commemorate the first day of Jesus' life on earth at Christmas, and yet we can totally overlook this last day of his earthly ministry. Simply put, 40 days have passed since Easter Day, the day of resurrection, and Ascension Day is the day that Jesus ascended, went up from a mountain on the outskirts of Bethany, watched by his followers, to be in heaven with God. Now, the Bible tells us about many unusual, perhaps unbelievable events which took place, and the Ascension is one of them. To our 21st century rational minds, to speak of someone going up in a cloud is beyond our comprehension. It simply couldn't happen. It's impossible. Indeed, all sorts of pictures may come to mind, like this, or even this. And even religious art doesn't help us sometimes. Yet the Ascension is an event which is central to our belief in Jesus' birth, death and resurrection. It is the day he is exalted and glorified. Now, although there are other references to Jesus ascending into heaven, for example in John's Gospel, when at the tomb on that first Easter day Jesus tells Mary Magdalene that he's not yet ascended, and it's also briefly mentioned in Mark's Gospel, it is Luke who gives us the fullest accounts of this significant event, both in his Gospel and also in the Acts of the Apostles, which Luke also wrote. And Jesus led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands he blessed them. While he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up into heaven, and they worshipped him. And they returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they were continually in the temple, blessing God. So when the disciples had come together, they asked him, "Lord, is this the time when you restore the kingdom to Israel?" He replied, "It is not for you to know the times or periods that the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." When he had said this, as they were watching, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. While he was going, and they were gazing up towards heaven, suddenly 2 men in white robes stood by them. They said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking upwards towards heaven? This Jesus, who's been taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven." So as a way of understanding the Ascension, let's think about some other seemingly impossible events that took place in Jesus' life and compare them with our experience and knowledge and understanding, and how all that might help us. There are, of course, many such events, not least the miracles. Now, many of us may well know of people who have been miraculously healed. Now, I've actually witnessed 2 in my own family. Other miracles, such as changing water into wine or the feeding of the 5,000, may stretch us a little bit more, but many people do experience God intervening and providing unexpectedly and in miraculous ways. Maybe think of times when God has done something like that in your life, God of the unexpected. But there are 3 events in Jesus' life that do take us that next step further into the seemingly impossible: the virgin birth, the transfiguration, and the resurrection. Although virgin births are known in the animal kingdom, And while scientifically possible, it's highly unlikely in humans, there is something particularly unique about the conception of Jesus through the power of the Holy Spirit and his birth to a virgin. Yet some do struggle with the plausibility of such an event. But as we'll see in a few minutes, the birth of Christ itself gives us a strong clue towards understanding the significance and meaning of who he is, and thus what the Ascension means as well. Another unusual event was the Transfiguration, when Jesus' appearance was transformed, and we read that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. It was accompanied by a vision of Moses and Elijah with Jesus on a mountain. Before then, and ever since, many have reported visions or seen people surrounded by light, such as Teresa of Avila and Hildegard of Bingen. And the 20th century English writer Evelyn Underhill, who was herself once observed by someone else to be transformed by light. I guess most of us have probably met people in whom we have seen the presence of God, perhaps through the peace we see in their faces, the calmness in their speech and wisdom of their words, God shining through their very presence. Is that our equivalent of witnessing a transfiguration, I wonder? And then, of course, the resurrection. Many people have been pronounced clinically dead, only to be resuscitated or come back to life, often minutes or sometimes hours later. It's even known as Lazarus syndrome. Yet with Jesus, it was maybe as much as 36 to 40 hours later that he was once again seen to be alive. Worryingly, some research for the BBC a while ago found that fewer than 1 in 3 people calling themselves Christians actually believed that Jesus rose from the dead. 40 years ago, it was the impossibility of the resurrection of Jesus that was the sticking point to me becoming a Christian. How can a man come back to life? But for me back then, and in all those examples we considered, we can see that the answer lies in the fact that Jesus was not an ordinary man. He was both man and God, fully human, fully divine. Therefore, if we believe that, and we believe that with God nothing is impossible, then these things such as the virgin birth, the transfiguration, the resurrection, and the ascension, much as they stretch and go beyond our human understanding, are, with God, possible. It is understanding this dual nature of Jesus, fully human, fully God, that is key to understanding the Ascension. But all the same, did it actually happen? Did Jesus actually rise into the air and disappear, leaving the disciples looking upwards at his big toe? Well, I guess we can think of levitation as an equivalent. Many magicians and illusionists have tried to convince us of human levitation. And we can read about people like Joseph of Cupertino, a 17th century Italian Franciscan monk known as the Flying Friar, who was famous for levitating in prayer. Well, Luke tells us that Jesus was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of the sight of the disciples. Now we know that a cloud is a sign of God's presence. It's been seen as such on many other occasions in the Old and New Testament. And the presence of angels is also recognised as a way that God makes himself known. Now, some have speculated that as at the Transfiguration, the 2 angels present at the Ascension were Moses and Elijah. Why do you stand looking up towards heaven, they ask. It's reminiscent of when, recorded in the book of Exodus, the Lord complained to Moses about the Israelites being stiff-necked people. Would God really want Jesus to leave behind a similar group? Surely this wasn't the model for being the believers Jesus wanted to leave behind. A group of stiff-necked people always looking towards the past. No, it's okay. I'll leave you to draw the modern comparison. After all, Jesus had already told the disciples what they should do. Be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Writing 40 years after the event, Luke was recording stories from or passed on by those who had seen Jesus ascending into heaven. As far as those witnesses were concerned, and bear in mind what else they'd seen in Jesus' time on earth, some of which they didn't understand and were astonished by, for them, that was what happened. And what is also unique about this occasion, and it shows once again the sheer magnitude and importance of it, is that in response to Jesus' ascension, the disciples are said to have worshipped him. Now, this is the first time that Luke speaks about that happening. And that takes us back full circle to the beginning, when the shepherds, the travellers from the east, worshipped the Christ child. In essence, the ascension of Jesus represents a significant truth. The physical presence of Christ departs from earth to be replaced by the spiritual presence in the form of the Holy Spirit, whose coming we'll celebrate in a few days' time at Pentecost. The ascension shows us that Jesus, fully human and fully divine, is now at home, both on earth and in heaven. The ascension and other similar events stretch our minds and our imaginations because we live in an earthly sense and not yet in a heavenly one. As Paul put it, we see through a glass darkly. We do not yet see face to face. We do not yet see the heavenly aspects. We get glimpses of heaven, but we are human beings, not yet divine beings. As Ronald Cole Turner put it, just as the incarnation of God becoming human in the form of Jesus reveals to us the outreach of the love of God, so the ascension reveals to us the transfiguration and the gathering up that is to come at the end. What happens to Jesus Christ, death, resurrection, and being raised in exaltation to glory, will happen to us all. The ascension is a reminder that our lives are caught up in something far more grand than we can imagine. So if we see the ascension of Jesus as an assurance for the present here on earth and a promise of what is to come in heaven, what does the ascension mean for you in your life here on earth? And what glimpses of heaven do you see?